CURES is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness for our mind, body, and spirit. I've always been fascinated with people like my next guest who have had near-death experiences and then go on to lead incredible lives. That is the case with Wynn Ford, who is, I will call you a truly multi-passionate or multi-hyphenate, as they call now, being, from teacher to fighter to opera singer to motorcycle rider and more. Someone who also died basically 3 times. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, I heard about your story and I was thinking, how could that be? Like, how could that happen to one person? And when I asked you to come on, you said, in fact, I know you're very humble, but your story of how you, the condition you had, the only other person that died from what you had, or rather that lived from what you had, was that nun who helped them was made into a saint?
Yes. It was actually when I was in the hospital and reading about it, because I'd never been sick a day in my life. So the experience of being ill and being in the hospital is completely new. So I started reading about what it meant. Of course, not reading anything medical, just reading experiential things. And the first thing that I came across was an article about how to have a medical survival declared a miracle by the Vatican. And it had to be somebody who had received full medical treatment in addition to prayer from somebody in the church, and then survive against all medical possibilities. And that woman happened to be somebody who had exactly what I had, who had a relapse shortly after a bone marrow transplant from leukemia. And the article was written from the perspective of the doctor who was called in to review the results. And she had assumed when she was looking at the slides of the bone marrow films that she thought somebody was going to be sued, that this was somebody who had received treatment and then died, and she was going to be supporting one side of a lawsuit or another. She had no idea that this was something for the Vatican, and found out later that, yes, this is a person who should have died. Everything medically should have led to that. It's a medical impossibility that she could have survived, and yet she did. And found out later that this was to prove it was a medical miracle, and then have the nun who prayed with her at her bedside to be anointed as a saint.
And that's what you had. You had that. Now, nobody became a saint after you lived, right?
Very far from it.
Not even yourself. But the reason I asked you here is because I think when you nearly die, and I can only imagine that, but when you nearly die, it must somehow teach the rest of us what it really means to live. And I know you've agreed with that.
Yes,
so
utterly.
There's a lot to get to, but like in that basic thing, it was nearly 3 times that you've lost your life, right? 3 times. What fundamentally, if there's one thing that changed in the way that you get up every morning now because of dying 3 times?
Probably the easiest thing for me to point to that I do differently, or that I don't do any longer, is a phrase that we all use. I never kill time. When the nature of my illness, the day I was diagnosed, and this is very unusual too, the cancer was so advanced that the day of my diagnosis, my treatment was started in the hospital, and they told me that with no treatment, I wouldn't make it to sunrise. And with treatment, I would have 24 hours to live so my family could come say goodbye. That was the best case scenario.
Wow.
So I didn't have time to think about, I didn't have time to be scared, I didn't have time to be worried, I didn't have time to think, oh, what's this gonna be like? Between diagnosis and treatment were a couple of hours, the drive from where I lived to the hospital. And from that moment on, people referred to me as dying. And I thought, the first thing that occurred to me, it happened to be on a Monday. And we all say, you know, on Mondays, terrible day of the week, I can't wait till the weekend gets here. And I thought, I'm not gonna live to the weekend. How many times have I wished time away? How many times had I wished that time would pass? How many times had I had wished, I'm not here, I'm not now, I'm someplace else and I'm some time else. And knowing that there isn't any time left, that every single, and I know this is a cliche, and we say it all the time, and I probably said it 1,000 times before I got sick, but I never actually lived in it, never actually felt it. All we have, and I know we know this, I know it's cliche, forgive me, all we have is now. All we have is here. There isn't anything else. And yet, we spend most of our here and now regretting what we did yesterday, hoping that tomorrow will be better and fearing that it probably won't be. And knowing that there is no tomorrow removed all of that from me and allowed me to actually experience what I'm going through, both positive and negative, right here and right now. So every single day, what is different is that I don't wake up and wish, oh, God, I wish it were Friday. I wish this day were over. I wish I didn't have to. None of that is there any longer.
You're
It's
cured
gone.
of that.
Entirely.
I mean, a lot of us are working on perhaps meditation or
Right.
trying to be grateful. And I use the word trying, which the Buddhists would say, take out the word try. But, you know, so this transformation of actually losing your life.
Yes.
And there was a period of time where you would have been medically dead, at least?
Yeah, the one time that I remember specifically, so part of the process, the treatment was 7 days of chemotherapy, 24 hours a day.
Okay.
And it began in the emergency room in the hospital since bone marrow creates leukemia, to essentially to stop the disease by sort of flattening my bone marrow and stopping all of the cancer cells from growing. And part of what the bone marrow does, it creates our red blood cells so we can breathe, but it also creates all of our disease-fighting cells. All of our immune system comes from the bone marrow. So all of that was shut off in hours.
Okay.
So all of the infections and things that were living in my body, that live in every healthy person, ran rampant. And one infection after another started, and it was a combination of those that ultimately carried me off, including a fungal pneumonia. And I remember I was having a hard time breathing, and my breathing came less and less and less, and realized that I wasn't able to breathe. Heard the nurses calling code blue and call a code and bring a cart, and the sensation of actually dying. And this is hard for people to accept sometimes. Was incredibly soothing. It was pleasant. It was a combination of sliding into the most perfect warm bath you've ever been in, or underneath the heaviest blanket on the coldest night when everything is perfect and snug and safe and easy. And I'm not saying that I have no memory or feelings of having died. I have no idea what came after that. But the actual process, which we're all so terrified of losing our life, was an incredibly easy and comfortable process. And what I got from that is that there's nothing that's scarier than dying, right? There's nothing scarier than losing everything that we have. But that's the only thing that we all have in common. It's the only destination that we all have. We're all going there.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And you don't fear death anymore because of
Not
having
in the
experienced
slightest.
it?
Not in the slightest.
Not at all.
No. And there are potential drawbacks for how I live my life.
You're not saying that you want to die.
No, I know. I'm not saying
But
that
you
sounds
really
great.
aren't
I'd like to
afraid of
repeat it.
And obviously most
No.
of us are.
Well, because it's loss.
Right.
It's losing. I mean, that's all there is to be scared of, is loss of love, loss of ability, loss of things that we care about, and ultimately loss of our vitality in our life. But since I've been through it, I know it isn't frightening, and I know it's inevitable. And the very fact that it's inevitable means it can't be scary. How can something that is guaranteed for every single one of us actually be frightening? It can't be. It can't be.
Well, I think, right, the frightening is that we don't know what it's going to be like or when it's going to happen or...
When is the kicker?
Right. And I think Frank Sinatra said that, right? Live every day like it's your last and one day you'll be right. So I want to take a moment and just update, because from an outsider perspective, and I'll share that I met you because you're a wonderful teacher at my son's school at Avon Old Farms. And, you said you chose to do that, this career, because after these experiences, the one thing is you wanted to do a career that it would matter the character of the person doing the career. Which
Absolutely.
A lot of people want a career because of the money or something like that.
Of course.
Doesn't factor for you.
Not in the slightest. There are, if I may, there are four things I think about when I think about choosing a job. First thing is I have to like doing it. I know there are days it'll be terrible, and we all have times where we hate our bosses and our colleagues in the work and wish, I don't want to do anything but this. But in general, the doing of it, I have to like it. It has to be work that needs to be done, that if I didn't do it, somebody else would need to. It's not something I made up just for me. It's a thing that's necessary. Third thing is the character of the person is important to the success of the job. It can't be a monster who does it. It can't be a self-absorbed, egotistical, fragile. It has to, the person I have to be to do it has to be somebody that I want to be.
No AI job.
Not for me. and the fourth piece was related to that is the person that I have to be to do it well is somebody I admire, which is why I stopped singing. I loved singing. I loved opera more than anything. Nothing engages more physically, emotionally, intellectually than singing opera. Nothing's even close. Mm-hmm. But who I had to be to do it well was somebody I didn't admire.
Really?
Yeah.
And we have a picture. I want to scroll through some of the pictures just
please.
because people will wonder, okay, so here you are as an opera singer. And there you are teaching kids about motorcycle riding and the bike. Perhaps, I don't know, I'm thinking of the book, The Zen of Motorcycle Maintenance. There's you at Avon Old Farms, a prep school in New England, dressed in your blazer and tie. There's so many different win forwards. Here you are, you're a fighter, a bare knuckle fighter. You're teaching self-defense.
Yes.
And you've, rode bikes and fought with the King of Jordan. You've sung opera.
I rode with the King of Jordan.
Okay.
I never fought with him. I rode motorcycles with him, but we never
rode bikes with the King
it never
of Jordan.
came to blows.
Did
no.
a bare knuckle fight? You are a bare knuckle fighter. You have been.
Mostly just straight boxing now, but yes, I did a lot of martial arts in my younger years, and a lot of that was bare knuckle.
So these are all so different things, and I think young people, which is wonderful, why you're in the role of teaching. Young people be like, I want to be this. I need to be this. I need to be X, Y, and Z to get to C, D, and E. So yet all of what you do is so unrelated. They're just things you're passionate about. Is that part of it?
That's what relates them. I'm passionate. We all love so many different things, but we feel that to do one well, we have to cut out the others. And there are times, of course, that I can't do. There's certain things that I can't do well while doing others. What I had to do to sing, the way I had to protect my voice and my body and my instrument, precluded my doing other kinds of things. So there are certain sacrifices that do have to be made to do things at a high level. But we have sort of a received opinion that certain kinds of things don't go with other ones. That's mythology. There's nothing that says, there's no law that says if you happen to be creative or expressive, you can't also like challenging yourself physically through fights or boxing with other people. There's nothing that says that must be so, right? I mean, Walt Whitman said at the end of that wonderful poem, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember exactly, something along the lines of if you say I contradict myself, I do. I am large, I contain multitudes. We all contain multitudes. None of us is only one thing. And we limit ourselves to our own and each other's loss. If we love it, we pursue it. If it becomes something that we stop loving or we realize that the loving of it is somehow hurting us or limiting us, we move on to other things that we love. And the fact that they don't seem to connect really doesn't matter because they connect for me. And the things that I learned from one translates into things that I use intellectually or emotionally in other ones. Maybe not physically. You know, the things that I would use as a fighter are not the same kind of physicalities that I would use as a singer. But the kind of preparation is very, very similar.
But, I think when you go through these really life-changing things, like dying, what you did, you would then, some people come out of it and say, wow, I have all this meaning. I really know that there's either life after death or everything happens for a reason. That actually wasn't, you have the opposite view of something happening for a reason.
Absolutely the opposite. Sorry, one of the side effects of my bone, I have a number of unpleasant side effects, and one of them is that my internal thermometer doesn't work very well.
So when we sit you under hot lights?
Well, it's actually, I don't ever feel hot or cold. My body just responds as if I were. So I have to ask somebody else if I never feel hot or cold. My body just does what it does. It's one of the fun side effects, along with constant pain and fatigue.
So you don't necessarily subscribe to the it's meant to be?
Not at all. Before I got sick, I did, because most things worked out. It's very easy to say everything happens for a reason when either it breaks your way and say, oh, well, either I deserved it or I earned it. And if it goes against you and you learn something from it that allows you to be better at the next thing, you say, well, the reason was so I could be better at the next thing, or the reason was because I was good at the last thing. When something that's so horrible happens, when tremendous and horrific loss happens that we didn't earn, that we didn't deserve, and the lessons from which were not worth the price, there is no reason that matters. And people told me all the time, everything happens for a reason. God fits the back to the burden. God always has a plan.
Your angels until you makes you stronger.
Absolutely. That's another one that I used to believe and no longer do.
But it didn't make you stronger in some... I mean, you're on a show talking about the importance of living well.
Yes.
Do you think in some ways it benefited you?
In some ways, absolutely it did. If it was worth the price, I'm not sure I would say that. But that doesn't mean that I didn't learn things from it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that other people can't learn from my experience. But I also, on the bone marrow transplant floor, it's a locked floor. It's like the ICU. All the air is filtered. Nobody's allowed on or off. Everybody is so sick that each nurse is on the floor, has only 3 patients at a time, because everybody there is on the cusp of dying, on the cusp of death. Most of the people who were on that floor with me died. Adolescents with parents, young parents with spouses who loved them and kids who depended upon them. How could I say, with anything other than tremendous vanity, there was a reason for my survival and not for theirs? How could I say that their loss was somehow for a reason? It's easy to say that my survival was because it worked out better for me. But seeing what other families went through and losing people whom they adored and cherished and needed, how could I say that rule, everything happens for a reason, what reason could there possibly be for them to lose what was so precious to them?
So now, as a teacher at an all-boys school, part of the program that you forward is character. It's a prep forward program that character matters. And many would say that we're at a crisis of character in our country, maybe in our world. So how do you wake up differently, or how, more importantly, do you teach it so that people go and maybe go back to people will say, oh, it's back to the good old days or whatever, but how do you now, having had this experience of almost losing your life, then go and teach young boys how to live? How do you teach that? What can moms and dads take away?
Before I got sick, I was a big, strong guy. I am a shadow of what I used to be.
And you're still pretty big. How tall are you?
Probably 6'5", 6'6", but I'm probably 100 pounds less muscular, and I don't want to talk about how much slower and less reactive than I used to be. And when I got out of the hospital the first time, so diagnosed, was admitted, and then I think it was about 6 weeks later I came out, I'd lost probably 160 pounds of muscle and was weak and sick and had died at one point and was just frail, and was talking to one particular brother whom I ride motorcycles with, saying that how could I still call myself a man if I can't do any of the things that I could? I had equated my masculinity with my capabilities. I didn't differentiate who I was from what I could do. And that was what started me on the path, I guess, to realizing that there are a lot of different ways to be a good man. There are many, many ways, and it is not just the ones that the sort of stereotypes that we grew up with. Those are not the only ways to be a good man. They themselves are perfectly fine. They're just myopic. There's so many other ways to be a good man. And because all of us, lose our physical abilities. Some of us may never have them. But that doesn't stop us from being good men, good fathers, good brothers, good husbands. There's so much to that. There's so much to having good character. And I talk specifically about being a good man versus being a good person because I work with boys. And the mission of our school is to develop good men with strong character who can live with conviction, right? Meaning that it isn't just, it's very easy to say we have character. It's very difficult to live with it. It's very difficult to actually sacrifice for a belief. It's very, very hard. It's very easy to espouse them. Simple, we all do it all the time. But it's incredibly difficult to risk something for something that we know is valuable. And what I realized, what my illness and then having come from such a physical world, even the opera world is still a very physical one, even though it's intellectual and emotional and expressive. It still requires an incredible physical activity to fill a multi-thousand seat space, over 150 members of an orchestra all sitting in front of you. And I'd lost my voice to the chemo. That's one of the many things that is now gone. That doesn't stop. That doesn't change my ability to stand for what we know is right and to stand against what we know is wrong. That being a good man, having good character, doesn't require us to fulfill a kind of fantasy of masculinity that not everybody can live up to.
Of being big or strong or making lots of money or power. Okay.
Be that physical, financial status, that not all of us will have that. In fact, very few of us do. And if only those of us who can be good men are those with some kind of power, what that leads to is what we have seen. People who don't have physical or financial or intellectual or whatever kind of power compared to other men or compared to other people in their lives. So they end up finding people who have less than they to push around to prove that they indeed are men.
Okay.
And it isn't the power that does it. It's having the character and the conviction to live by and for the things that we know are right. And that doesn't require power.
And I think anyone listening can tell you can be very philosophical, and you've grown up, reading the deepest texts. You've grown up in prep schools around New England, and now are teaching at them. So very well read. You've been referred to at school as a math genius, as an opera singer, all these things. Yet if you see you
little
like
hyperbole.
You like to ride your motorcycles. You also have your tattoos. Again, things that don't seem to go together, right? New England prep school, riding motorcycles, wearing tattoos. But for the rest of us who are trying to say, like, gosh, that didn't happen to me, but how do I live a good life based on someone who now woke up and realized that life is precious when you've died 3 times? One of the things that you boil it down to is that it is frightening to live without joy.
Yes.
And so we need to live with joy, but that loss is unavoidable. So is joy a priority? Is joy on your to-do list every day?
Every single day. Well, I had to decide again and again and again if I was going to live. I would look at my watch and say, okay, it's 1:30. Can I live to 20 of and still be alive? Can I make it that far without dying? I was that sick for months and months and months and months at a time. And in order to do that, I had to have a reason. There had to be something to live for, because I already knew that dying was fine.
Okay.
And if I was going to do this, why? And it has to be for joy, for meaning, for connection, for love. And I know this is a word that many of us are uncomfortable with, for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend most of our time being afraid of the bad things that are going to happen, instead of focusing our energy on living into, leaning into, creating, celebrating the things that bring us incredible pleasure. The bad things are going to happen. No, maybe not all the ones we're afraid of, but some will. Even if it's gradual, we will get old. We will lose the things that we could do. We will lose relationships. We will lose loves. We will lose abilities. It's going to happen. Because it's inevitable, we don't need to think about it.
Okay.
We don't need to worry about it.
Don't think about the bad stuff.
It's inevitable. But joy and pleasure and connection, those are intentional. Those don't happen by mistake. Those happen because we decide to make them happen. And one of the things that people would tell me all the time.
Can I have you hold that thought for 1 second? You know why?
Please.
We have to hear from our sponsors for one moment, and then we're coming back with the rest of Winford's story. Take a listen.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit WheelerHealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
All right, we're back with a fascinating conversation of Winford, who, before I even met you, was described to me as one of the most fascinating people I would ever meet, which I truly believe that to be so, just because I think you're giving people permission that, as you said, you don't have to be one thing. I mean, from big, strong fighter to opera singer to prep school boy to riding motorcycles, all these different things. So in our final few minutes together, if you could encourage other people to live like they're dying every day, because you would say we are, and I guess that's true. What do you teach the boys? How can the rest of us, what's one guiding principle you think we need to think about that we could learn from someone who's died?
First time I overheard somebody refer to me as dying really upset me. And I thought, well, so are you. Maybe I'm doing it more swiftly, but we all are, right? Biologically, what's the difference between living and dying? And I realized if that part is something we cannot avoid, we can choose to live deeply. We can't necessarily choose the length, but we can choose the depth. We can choose to connect. We can choose to be kind. We can choose to be aware that even when things are awful, they don't have to be turned into good things. There are still wonderful things. People would say all the time.
Not everything is, you said actually reject the tyranny of cheerfulness. So
yes.
Everybody's saying,
there's a silver lining.
Yeah. You would say.
Exactly. People would say, there's going to be good in this. There isn't necessarily, and that's okay. Let the things that are bad be bad.
We're okay to just let someone just have a bad moment.
And remember that the other things are still there. People would ask me how I was, and I said, I'm terrible. I can't move. I'm in agony. I'm too weak to peel a banana. I can't tie my shoes. But sun is still warm. Sugar is still sweet. Sex is still wonderful. The things that are great remain great, even when there are things that are not great. It has to be okay that some things are not okay. When we feel that we have to turn loss or fear or pain into something wonderful, we're asking ourselves to do something impossible.
Okay.
Allow it to be bad, and then let it go. And remember that the wonderful things are still there too. And I used to struggle with letting it go. I used to ask myself all the time, what does that mean? And I finally came to an answer. It's stop holding on to it.
Like literally just say, I want to let this go.
Yes.
I'm letting it go.
Because I would think, how do I do that? What's the physical mechanism by which I let this go? And I realized all I have to do is stop holding on to it.
Okay.
It'll drift away.
Okay.
There's always wonderful things, and there's going to be pain and loss.
And that's just part of being human.
Yes. And what our life is what we choose to focus on.
What our life is what we choose to focus on. All right, in our final minute, are you going to write a book?
Nobody's ever asked me to. Nobody has asked me to.
Well, I think you should. You write every day. Write it all down. We'll get you the transcription of this podcast. But no, I really appreciate you being here, and I think stories like that do help people. So for what we can take away from those who have seen the other side, so to speak, and how nearly dying can make us live a good life, we appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. Win Ford. Thank you. And for all of you at home, thank you for being here. You can follow me at Kara Sundlin for more information on the cutting edge of wellness. Please download and subscribe to the CURES podcast. Maybe you want to share this one. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.
CURES, sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.